Lovely to hear the buzz in the room. Thank you so much to everybody for joining us here this morning. There may be a few stragglers. We're delighted to have so many participants today, so thank you. I would first like to acknowledge the Lekwungen and Wasanich territories on which we are enjoying this session today, and that we are truly blessed to be living, working, and learning on these beautiful lands. So I first wanted to acknowledge that. For those of you who may not know me, I'm Barb Severin. I'm the Executive Director of Human Resources, and I'm also the Chair of the Diversity Advisory Committee. And it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. Alden is currently the Director of Intercultural Understanding Strategy Development for the University of British Columbia, where he leads the implementation of the university's commitment to intercultural understanding. Prior to being at UBC, he led the development and implementation of CBC's National Diversity Strategy as the Manager of Diversity Initiatives for CBC Television. He currently serves as a member of the Board of Success, the Omni Advisory Committee, Rogers Television, the Thai Solutions Group, and the Hua Foundation. Alden has lived in Manila, Winnipeg, Edmonton, and Regina, and currently lives in the Lower Mainland with his partner and 2 sons. We are privileged and we are excited to have Alden join us today, and so I would ask you to join me in welcoming Alden Habacon.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Barb. It's a real honor to be here today, and I just want to thank Nancy for the effort she's made to bring me. It feels like I checked our first emails were back in December of 2014 as an effort to bring me in. So I'm really, really happy, and I hope I really deliver. You know, with that much effort, so much more expectation to deliver. So I'm going to be talking a little bit on what I've called the intercultural growing pains to internationalization. I know all of us in higher education feel the pressure, feel the crunch from the province to meet our budgetary needs and our budgetary gaps with international students, and you know, their targets were around 25%, and there hasn't been much thought about the impact that it's had on our student body and especially on our faculty and our staff, and that's, I think, something worth talking about. The reasons why I've made it such an important aspect of my work is because, as Canadians, because of being in an environment of multiculturalism for 40 years, we often feel bad talking about anything bad to do with diversity. We've been told everything with diversity is good. More diversity, better. Good, 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 good. And if someone says, I'm kind of feeling something not so good, right? They're kind of nervous, because like, would that make me a racist if I say this is hard or this is more work? And what I would say is no. Actually, what we've done is a disservice to our faculty and staff by not acknowledging, in fact, there are challenges around this work, and that, in fact, it might be better off to not do it at all if we're not going to do it well, right? The pain it causes students, the pain and suffering it causes our faculty and staff may not be worth it. And so part of what I'm going to share with you today is how I've seen it in the work that I've done at UBC for the last 5 years, how we might do it better, how we might define it as doing it well. So thank you for the acknowledgement, Barb, of us being on the Coast Salish land. It's really important for us to acknowledge that, and in some ways it feels a little bit like a protocol. I'm happy that we have this protocol. You know, when I do speaking engagements in Ontario, they don't have this protocol, and it feels very, very funny for me, and we have a different relationship to our First Nations and our Aboriginal peoples on the West Coast than there is on the East Coast. And this is an important aspect for me, because I feel like, at UBC anyways, I would assume we're all of our higher education institutions across the country, we're part of an enterprise to re-acknowledge and revitalize our First Nations and Aboriginal communities. So I'm visiting from the unceded ancestral and traditional territories of the Musqueam peoples, and it's on that land that I have had the opportunity to develop the ideas that I'm going to share with you today. This is particularly meaningful to me because I feel like we're also part of an enterprise to revitalize these communities through education. And so this is a snapshot of some of our graduate students. We have a huge number of First Nations and Aboriginal graduate students. And because of our relatively low literacy around Aboriginal cultures, generally the diversity of the number of First Nations cultures represented there is invisible to many of us. We just see a group of First Nations people. But in fact, this place is a very, very diverse place. 250 First Nations. Every time I ask how many languages, the number changes. This place was multicultural and intercultural long before Trudeau ever made it an official policy. And so people ask me, how is it that Canada is able to do this almost haphazardly, with almost no thought to it? It just kind of made a policy and then it happens. How often does that happen? And we've heard Germany, the Chancellor of Germany come and say that they've tried our policy and it didn't work as well there. Well, the reason is that this idea was indigenous to this land for thousands of years. And so we're participating not just in the bounty of this land, but the bounty of the ideas connected to this land. And just the fact that we can have this conversation is such a privilege. Not all universities around the world can have the conversation that we can have today around these issues. So I want to share a funny story. When I was first brought to UBC, the provost introduced me to the Committee of Deans. So the Committee of Deans at UBC is the power, right? So this is the most intimidating group, I think, at UBC. They're the most powerful people on campus. Some of them don't even know it. And I was sitting next to Dave Farrar, who was the provost at the time, and he started talking about this portfolio. And he said, we've been trying to think of how do we implement intercultural understanding on campus. And the only thing I could think of, being a chemist, was that this wasn't going to be a structured thing. This wasn't going to be a thing where you could go to point A to point B and here's 15 steps in between. This was something a little bit more fluid and a little bit more organic, kind of like a virus. I was like, where is he going with this analogy? And then he goes, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to our virus. And he turned to me. I am the virus. So, you know what, I actually really like this analogy, although we have a negative connotation to virus. What I think he meant wasn't the flu virus, but more in terms of a social virus, not a social virus, but kind of how things spread virally over social media and through community and organizations. And so a lot of my work wasn't to find the most resistant places, but to find the places that were most open. And so it's taken me 6 years to kind of move through UBC and as well reach you now. So you're now at this next stage of infection. And I hope it carries on. And I hope that I share with you some things that excite you and are practical and you're able to take away and talk about with others. And I hope it grows. This conversation around this grows. We want this to be more diverse, more globally connected, more international in terms of the education that we offer, but we want to do it well, and we want to be thoughtful about it. All right, so what are we talking about when we say internationalization? We mean a lot of different things. This has almost become a euphemism in higher education, so I'm just going to walk through first a little bit of what it might mean. So actually at UBC, it primarily means research partnerships. Being a research-intensive university, it has to include research partnerships. It includes our curriculum. This is probably the most challenging aspect of this work, is how do we internationalize our curriculum? Our faculty at UBC are very, very possessive about their curriculum, as they should be. All instructors are. It's their intellectual property, and there's some a concern about the big boss coming out and saying you need to now change your curriculum in this way, and can have effect. The recruitment of our faculty is a big aspect of it. A lot of faculty from all over the world are being brought to Canada to help facilitate and give a different perspective. So in the news lately, the School of Journalism has brought a new faculty member who was recently released from jail as a journalist. And so that's an important thing. I'm so excited because here we are trying to create the journalists of the future, and you kind of look around the room of journalism and you're like, who's here reflecting the diversity of the world right now, right? And then that's a concern. What else? The study abroad, right? So we often refer to this as a mobilization. There's always a concern about study abroad is that a very limited number of Canadian students actually get the opportunity to do so because this is tied to resources. If you can raise the money, you can go. If you can't, unfortunately, not part of your education. And then the global environment. is changing. The internationalization of how we're seeing our education as a whole is changing. And then, of course, the definition of international is different from university to university. In fact, it's different from campus to campus. So UBC has two campuses. On the Vancouver campus, international means students that do not have Canadian status. On our Okanagan campus, it includes new immigrant students because they realize that new immigrant students also have different needs than students that are born or raised in Canada and have a different level of fluency around the academic culture. And you know, there's supposed to be a graphic. I should have waited for there's a really nice graphic in there. I'll have to send that to you. Oh, there it is. Ta-da. I thought it was okay. Primarily, though, what we often mean is actually the recruitment of students. And that's where the discourse has changed over the last maybe 15 years. It's a moving target. It really, and the reason being, of course, you know, whenever people ask me about mysteries at UBC, I always say, you know, after watching all, you know, CSI for I don't know how many decades, you know, the answer to all of your questions, all your mysteries is always follow the money, right? Where's the money will be the answer. And so absolutely, this is one of the biggest challenges that we face in British Columbia is that the province isn't saying, here's more money, even though the cost of education is going up. At the same time, we're removing the limitations of the number of international students that you can bring in. And so what university is not thinking, we need this to help keep afloat. So what are the implications of that? Well, let's first talk about the opportunity. I found this quote in this old report from 1962. I'll just read it out for you. Experience shows that a society, however successful it may have been in the past, will not long survive if it cannot cope with the tasks of a new era. For this reason, every civilized society tends to develop institutions which will enable it to acquire, digest, and advance knowledge relevant to the task which it is thought will confront it in the future. Of these institutions, the university or the college is most important. And I thought, how timely. We're dealing with some real serious issues right now. And there's an expectation that in places of higher education, that this is where the solutions will be tested, will be played out, will be criticized, and we have that opportunity. As we invite all the world to come be a part of our campuses, for better or for worse, the opportunity is for us to think through the challenges of having a sudden burst of diversity in our communities. And I think about Germany, for example. It's really been the most, in the news, the most open to bringing in refugees from Syria. And I just thought, there's an endless amount of intercultural work there for me to do. Like with the stuff we're dealing with, I can't even imagine. They've gone from 0 to 100 in a week. And I have family in Germany. I've been talking to colleagues at UBC who are German and have family in Germany, and they're just like, people don't know how to respond. They know it's the right thing to do. Absolutely, it's the right thing for them to do, but they're also thinking like, this isn't, we're not Canada. We don't have this multicultural milieu about us that is going to enable us to adapt. And so this is one of the things that the university, and I'm hoping Camosun College will actually offer Victoria, is a kind of a crucible for within we can test our capacity for ambiguity. A crucible for where we can stretch our ability to manage the unknown and the unfamiliar. So that's very, very big. So some of that, of course, is taking, sending students abroad. But part of the challenge, and actually what we've learned, is that we don't need to send students abroad to be able to give create an intercultural learning experience. We can actually have that here. And of course, going abroad doesn't necessarily translate or automatically mean students will come back with learning. I have this, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but one of the things that we've learned is that contact, proximity to, or being around diversity doesn't actually produce learning on its own. It has the potential to, but it doesn't on its own. So we often think about this, if we send a student off into cultural immersion, will they come back more informed about that culture? Okay, so I'll use this as a scenario. Imagine you were a workforce of about 50 staff, and all of you were women, except for one guy. Does that man go home with a deeper understanding of what it means to be a woman in the 21st century. Right? He's in touch with diversity every day, all the time, all year long. And the potential is there. But what the research actually shows is that, in fact, he does not. He will think he is. And when I go for beer with him, he will tell me how much of an expert he is. And I will believe he is, too. But, in fact, maybe not. And so there's some things that need to happen. And we can actually facilitate that learning here. So just to give you an idea of what I'm working with, this is a snapshot of the diversity at UBC. We have 50 to 55,000 students on our campus. 8,000 of them are international students. I'm told actually that number is about 10,000 now. Our campus is feminizing. You might notice that on your campus as well. The oil sands has pulled a lot of young men in Canada out of university for much faster pay. That's hurting right at the moment because of the economy in Alberta. We have about 1,300 Aboriginal and First Nation students. 79% of our student population, so that's 79% of 55,000 people, can speak 2 or more languages on our campus. It's amazing. And what blows my mind away with that is you can't tell by walking around campus. So that's something that we really need to change. When you walk around campus, it feels like an English-only campus. And I go, like, let's give people the impression it's far more diverse than that. So that's something we're having to work on. 50% of our student population speaks English as its first language, right? So clearly 88,000 out of 55,000 isn't half, right? So there's a good portion of Canadian students who don't speak English as their first language. So you can kind of do the trajectory math and figure out there's a huge amount of first generation or newer immigrant students on our campus. 1/3 of our student population, 1 out of 3 students speaks Mandarin or Cantonese. That's a huge group. And so the interesting thing for me is when I first arrived 5 years ago, I was just asked a very practical question. Does the other 2/3 of non-Chinese speaking students go home with any understanding of what it means to be a Chinese person in the world? Any kind of Chinese. There's millions of different kinds of Chinese out there. And every student I spoke to, and I spoke to thousands of students, said no. And I said, that's so bizarre. Because if we were in Europe, or let's say we were in Brazil, and 1/3 of the student population was Brazilian, would you expect to graduate with some Brazilian words, Brazilian mannerisms, some even a token under, like, I know the beer. I know what beer they like. Sure, right? But here, in this case, nothing. Not even when Lunar New Year was. I'm like, just the largest migration of people in the world during Lunar New Year, and they couldn't tell me the date. So something was wrong. And so that was part of my task, was to determine what the issue was. So here's some more positive statistics. 62% of students at UBC feel that the diversity of their campus has had a positive impact on their personal life and their intellectual growth. Good. That's what we said. That's what we're saying to our local residents. That's what we're saying to our local families who are concerned about the impact of this on their children. This is having a positive impact. Where we're concerned is that the number falls when we ask them about the impact on their education. I expected it to be at least 62% or higher. And actually, it goes down tremendously. You could read this number as meaning 47% either did not have an opinion, so it's a neutral impact, or had a negative or disagreed that the diversity of the campus was having a positive impact on their education. And that's very concerning. That for me is almost 1 out of 2. You can't really split a population into 53%. So 1 out of 2 is a significant number for me. So one of the things that I started to do, and I heard this out of a conference that I attended. One of the world's gurus on intercultural learning made this statement and said that the only way to actually reduce racism on campuses was not just by teaching students about racism, and that's something we've done for decades. Actually, what we have to do is increase empathy, which I think we do fairly well at universities, but also decrease anxiety. Bless you. So if there's more anxiety on campus, for whatever reason, those communities tend to be more susceptible to doing and saying and thinking racist things. And this is also true across society. During the race riots of, I believe it was 1904, at the time, the economy wasn't doing well. And really, it was a concern around job security. And the labor movement actually triggered the race riots in Seattle. They were trying to chase all the Sikh community, the Punjabi community, out of Seattle. Well, where did they go? They ran across the border into Vancouver, and the riot followed them all the way into Chinatown and Vancouver. It's a terrible time of our history. And that was driven by anxiety triggered by the insecurity of the economy. And so I began to ask students, I conducted some focus groups with students, I began to ask them what were some of their anxieties that they were experiencing as a result of being on a campus as diverse as this. And this was really controversial. This was admitting to them that multiculturalism had created a bad thing. They're like, you can ask that? You can say that? I'm like, yeah, we can say this. Let's just pretend we can. And here's the list that they came up with. It was actually quite profound. I won't go through it all, but the top one I want to point out to you. This growing gap between second-generation students and students that are new to Canada. So the biggest intercultural tension at UBC is between Canadian-born and Canadian-raised Chinese and students that are Chinese that are new to Canada and have not been here for 10 years, for 10 or less years. There's a real serious tension to the point where they actually have a sometimes latent, sometimes overt animosity towards each other. They don't make friends. They don't like each other. They sit as far from each other as they can in class. And as an instructor, you can't tell who's who until you start talking with every single one of those students in your class. And it's invisible to a lot of our administration and our faculty. So that was a big one. I'll point out another one that was kind of weird. This thing, we don't have good language around it. It's called white anxiety. It's the anxiety of being visibly white in a class where isn't. And one of the reasons we need to start talking about this is because that anxiety can actually become the fuel of the next biggest, white supremacist movement we've ever seen in Canada. And if we pretend it's not there, that's bad, right? This is real anxiety. This is a real, I'm not sure what to make with myself. I'm learning about white privilege, and I'm coming from rural Alberta. I've never had privilege. I'm not rich like these kids at UBC. Right? And you're telling me I have privilege? I don't know what that means. By the way, I'm lost. I have no idea what I'm doing here. And this is really new to me. And I was joking with Stephen Toop, who was the president at the time. I said to him, the challenge with that one is, how do I create the poster for that? How do I create the support group for students around that? Conversations about being white in an environment that's changing rapidly. I go, if these were African students, I know that I can imagine the email right now. I go, can you give me some advice on how I'd write that email for this group of students? And they all laughed. And I go, but really, it's not funny because this is very real. This is our biggest challenge. And we have created an environment that looks like a bento box. So when you look at our stats, it's so pretty. It's so impressive. Wow, UBC is so diverse. And as well, all of our universities actually in Canada, very diverse compared to the US and Australia, but the diversity doesn't touch. So, everyone has their little spot, they have their little corner, it's like a bento box. We've created bento box multiculturalism. And in many ways, our communities, it's just a reflection of our communities as well, right? And we use words like enclave. I don't think they're truly enclaves, but this is a little bit more closer to what I imagine our situation to be. So how do we break this down so that learning, that intercultural experience actually happens, not just for our students, but for you, first and foremost? Are you going home as faculty and administration and staff with a deeper understanding of the world? Because in many ways, the diversity of our campuses is often greater than the diversity that we see in the public. So for our campus in Kelowna, UBC is the most diverse place in the city. And that's our question. Do the faculty and staff who all live in that area, and they're all local people, are they going home with a deeper understanding of the world? And if not, why? And is that a concern? Of course it's a concern. All right, the other big thing that we know is that where intercultural learning and intercultural experiences actually take place on campus, and there's lots of places at UBC that they do, they only happen through intention and by design. And part of the mythology that we've been working with is that if you throw a group of people together from all over the world, shake them in a bag, dump them out of the bag, they're going to be friends and singing Kumbaya, and they're going to want to have kids with each other, and you know what? And actually, no, that's not what happens. What happens is this. They come out organized, and you're like, what? How did you all become clubs? Do we have rules around these clubs? What do you mean you don't want to speak English in your club? That means I can't join your club. And then we get emails from students saying, I can't join that club. And we're like, uh-oh. We didn't think this through. So this is St. John's College. It's an international graduate college at UBC. And they go to a great extent, great lengths to enforce that this is an intercultural place. All the residents have dinner together. It's very much like a traditional college type of model. And it's intentional. It's impactful. And the students really have an intercultural experience. The students at UBC that live on residence are not permitted to have roommates from the same source country. And the students hate that. Like, I want that person. I met that person in orientation. I want that person as a roommate. Nope, doesn't work that way. And they hate it. They fight it. But like, no, if we open that Pandora's box, we know exactly where that goes. And about a year in, they begin to appreciate it. Like, you know what? I've made all these friends now. Like, yeah, that was the point. That was absolutely the point. Okay, so exposure, contact, and proximity to diversity does not on its own produce understanding or learning. And likewise, intercultural learning does not happen on its own. It does not happen by accident, as we always thought it had. So how do we do this well? So I've split this up into 4 quadrants just to kind of make this really simple, and that's in your handout. And if you're wondering, my background is actually in visual arts, and so I like pictures. It helps me to make sense of complex things. So the first thing is to really know your business case. I'm going to talk about the business case, and often our business case is only half informed, and often our business case is only just about money, and I'd like us to think about it as being, I encourage you to think about it as being a little bit more than that. If you haven't had the opportunity to write a business case, it doesn't actually require an MBA. I'm sorry if any MBAs in the room. They want to let that out. The formula for a business case is very, very simple. It's 2 parts. One is pleasure enhancement. The other part is pain avoidance. What is the pleasure enhancement we're trying to create for the organization, for myself, and as well, what is the pain avoidance we're trying to reduce or eliminate for the organization or myself? So chocolate and pain avoidance. I have to come up with a better, I have to come up with maybe a picture of a broken ankle or something. I don't know. Think of that. So, and then of course we look at what are the gains, what are the financial gains, plus or minus the pain that we create to acquire those financial gains. And that piece is often missing. What is the pain that we've created to acquire those gains? And does that actually create an actual benefit or loss? So one of the things I've been doing recently is I've been working on a report for employing people with disabilities. And what we have found is that if a person with a disability finds a full-time job, especially if they're only getting paid minimum wage, so they actually become employed, they actually will end up with a net loss because they'll not be qualified to get all the other benefits around child care and extended benefits, et cetera. And I go, where's the incentive to work? Any right-minded person would not work. So you can't look at them and say, oh, you should be working. Like, we created that system. So we have to always think that through. Now, so here is the pain we've created. As a part of developing the strategic plan for intercultural understanding, I interviewed one-on-one over 250 faculty and staff at UBC. And what I found amongst the faculty was that it was unanimously felt, or mostly felt, that UBC had internationalized faster than it had given its faculty and staff the time and the resources to adapt. Right? So curve A. We never thought what curve B should actually be. What would be more realistic ramping up? We get to the same spot, but maybe not as fast. And as a result, not creating as much a pain for the instructors. And I actually used the language pain. And I tried to put that into the strategic plan, and I was told to remove it because we're not allowed to talk about pain. And I'm like, if you met these 250 people that I talked to, they turned into counseling sessions, right? I wasn't being paid as a counselor, but I was counseling, and it was real pain. And I don't know if administratively, if it makes sense to like kind of downplay it as an issue, right? In the classroom, when they're looking at a classroom and they're like, I don't know if anyone's paying attention. I don't have the cultural skills to be able to communicate to this group. That's real panic. It's real anxiety. It's real pain. So that was the number one big issue And I actually came up with, these are the top list of the 4 faculty pain that I think all the institutions should be aware of and actually expect. So a growing cultural gap between faculty and student on academic expectations. Students come with, there's a range, there's no right or wrong, but everyone comes with different expectations. Some instructors think that all the knowledge should be discovered by the student. And many of our students are coming from places where they expect all the knowledge to be downloaded from the instructor. Okay, well that setup is an instant recipe for a conflict, right? And we need, so one of the things that we've been doing is we've developed a very simple survey, and we actually have faculty take it and students take it to kind of see how far off they might actually be from one another. And we know who needs to adjust. It will be the student, right? If you have like 20 different learning styles in a class, the instructor can only do so much. They'll do their best, but there's only so much they can do. The increasing demands of a complex intercultural teaching environment, insufficient incentive for excellence in intercultural teaching and service. This is unique to UBC because we are not a teaching-intensive university. We're a research-intensive university, so our faculty are rewarded for their research as opposed to their teaching, which may not be the case across all of BC, and a lack of cross-cultural connection between students and between faculty as well. So I've often heard this story of a faculty member is more likely to invite someone from the other side of Canada to come speak in their class than walk across campus into a different discipline and say, hey, would you bring your diverse perspective into my class? Because there's no prestige involved in bringing someone from law or medicine or into business. There's way more prestige flying them in from Rotman, right? We're a real school now, right? And it's, and so students see that. They're like, okay, well, you don't talk with them, they don't talk with you. I'm like, why would you expect us to be any more intercultural than you, right? You are at the peak of your careers, and I just want to be like you. So, blank faces is one of the biggest challenges I actually hear. I'm looking at a sea of 300 students, and all I see is, and my joy of teaching that brought me into being an instructor is like right down in the dumps. I don't want to be there. I can't tell if they want to be there. So one of the things that I'm doing, I have given this workshop to thousands of students at UBC now, is I'm training them to bring the joy back into teaching. I basically said to them, this is your tuition, this is your money, you and your family's money. What happens when your instructor loses their enjoyment in teaching you? They're smart. They're like, well, the value of the quality of the education begins to fall. I'm like, yes. So whose responsibility is it to ensure that they enjoy teaching? Yours. Right? This is the face you should never see. They should never see this face. And if that's new to you, you figure that out. Because you paid this money. You want the full value for your tuition? Don't do that. Right? And they laugh and they laugh. And I go, you got to smile, you got to nod, you got to get in there, participate, challenge them, bring back that joy. And it doesn't have to be all of you. It only needs to be 10% of you in the first 2 rows. Make them love it. I promise. All of your grades will go up 1 grade point. Right? And they're like, it's good. I'm like, yeah, this is in your control. Okay, that's a real big issue. All right. So what is it that we're missing? The most dominant discourse around this is referred to as intercultural competency. And there's a lot of different language used in a lot of different frameworks. There's actually about 30. And there's different language depending on the discipline. So in healthcare and HR, we often refer to this as cultural competency. This isn't new. This has been around for decades. But the common language now is intercultural competency. Now, we tested this language at UBC, and what we found is that educators don't like this word. Our scholars don't like this word because it implies a state of incompetency. So when you're trying to tell someone who's making a crazy amount of money, who thinks they're the smartest person in the world, they're somewhat incompetent, they don't like this at all, right? So what all these frameworks have in common is that they refer to a set of attitudes, skills, and knowledge required to act and communicate more effectively and more appropriately across different cultural groups. And what we've added to that is a 4th element, and that is relationships. We shared this model with our colleagues and the Musqueam community, and they came back and they said, this attitude, skills, and knowledge thing, this intercultural competency thing, it's kind of Eurocentric. Like, we thought you might have that, often have that response to everything we do, right? And then what they said was, it doesn't matter how much respect you have for Musqueam. It doesn't matter how much communication skill you think you have with our community, or how much knowledge you think you have about us, if you don't have real relationships with us, if you don't really have a meal with us, none of that matters. All right. You're right. So we added that piece. So we got some input, and we've come up with this model that we now refer to as intercultural fluency. So what intercultural fluency implies is that we all come to this work with different levels of fluency. If I don't have fluency for your particular group and your particular environment, it doesn't make me competent. I just don't have the fluency for it. I need to find someone who has the fluency, and I'm going to try to acquire that fluency. We split the model into 4 quadrants. If this looks like a healing circle to you, it absolutely is, because all of this is about fixing kind of the pain we created on our campus. So the attitudinal piece is intercultural awareness. This is the expectation that there will be diversity in my classroom and the valuing of that diversity in my classroom. It's not a bad thing. It's a very good thing for me and my students. Intercultural capital refers to the intercultural social capital, the network of people you want to create for yourself. So you can't be an expert in everything, no matter how hard you try. There's a limit to our empathy, and I'll give you an example. When my wife was 9 months pregnant, I said to her, "Oh dear, I really feel for you. I kind of know what you know where this is going, right?" And she turns to me, she goes, "You have no idea how I'm feeling right now." I don't know. I wanted to give her the feeling that I really wished I could take some of that burden off her, but it doesn't matter. And so there's a limit to that. So sometimes the best way to communicate to my wife, to my partner, is through her sister. To talk with her sister first and go, "I gotta tell her this thing, and I don't know, tell her they didn't. What would your recommendation be?" Or mom, mother-in-law, I refer to my mother-in-law as my mom. What do you think before I bring this news to my wife, your daughter, and get some thoughts on the fluency needed to communicate with my partner. Okay, intercultural communication skills, very self-explanatory, and cultural literacy refers to having the cultural knowledge needed to be more effective, needed to act and behave more effectively and more appropriately. So here's one of the things that we've seen happen over the last, I'd say, 20 years, is that intercultural learning has been pushed to outside of the classroom and become the responsibility of campus life. Once upon a time, it used to be the classroom was where you learn these things. Remember grade 3? Everyone was different in grade 3 because it didn't matter if everyone looked the same or was the same racially. Culturally, we all came from different families. Every family had a different culture. Everyone treated Christmas slightly different. For some it was crazy, for some it was very modest. Right? And we have a sense of that. And in grade 3, it was like, okay, I'm going to learn to be around people who are different and work with people. And then somehow we get to university and it's like, no, it's not in the classroom. Because it happened so fast and so quickly that the response from faculty was, I didn't create this, I didn't ask for this, I can't do it, it can't be on me. So it's on you, administration, and you, campus life, you figure it out. And the thing is that when we ask students, they actually expect to learn it in the classroom, and they need it in the classroom. It's actually affecting their academic performance. Hence, the 53% are getting the benefit of this diversity in their classroom from group work, from meeting with people who are different than themselves. And so what we want to do is actually bring it back into the classroom through this. So the intercultural fluency is the means. We want to raise the intercultural fluency of our faculty and our staff to be able to do this. Now, I don't remember the handouts I gave you. There's one here referred to as intercultural teaching competence. So this is really new. This was produced by Nanda Dimitrov. She's in the Teaching and Learning Center at Western University. I really wish she had written this when I started 5 years ago. This would have been so helpful. This is the most detailed breakdown of the skills, the attitudes, and the knowledge that instructors need to be able to teach a multicultural classroom and create an intercultural learning environment. I won't go through it in detail, but I wanted to make sure that you had, this is really the newest, most cutting-edge, pioneering collection of research. And one of the things that I've been doing at UBC, we've been doing some training for our librarians and our library staff. They've made intercultural training mandatory, bless you. is that we're now going through this set of, I think it's 13 characteristics, and we're having the library staff rewrite this so that the language applies to their work. And so I'll be doing that with our security staff. We'll be going through the exact same exercise and going through the different items and changing the language, because this language right now is really specific to instructors, and changing the language so it's a little bit more understandable and a little bit more accessible to people in different disciplines. But I encourage you to go through them, go back to your units, and talk about, like, what of these make sense for us? Which ones do you think we have? Which ones do we have no idea what this is talking about? And let your institution know. And then that gives the folks in HR, the folks in your teaching and learning centers, some direction as to what training and what resources to make available. Okay, I'm just going to talk real quickly about culture and the impact that culture has on the way we see the world. And this is from Darla Deerdorf, who's the world's leading guru on intercultural competency. She describes a story of two groups of people being born wearing different colored sunglasses. One being born wearing blue, and one being born with wearing red. And then somewhere in adulthood, one of the people in the blue camp says, what's your name, sorry? Jesse says, I'd like to see the world from someone else's perspective. I think that's what would be valuable to us. Could I borrow someone else's sunglasses? She goes over to Nancy, and Nancy's wearing red sunglasses, and Nancy says, well, actually, someone just recently passed away. We have some extra sunglasses. We're going to share those. So you put them on. You think you're going to see red. They think you're going to see red. What color does she actually see? Purple. Is it wrong for her to see purple? No. Could she have changed it? No. That's her lens. That's how she's going to see it. And what I love about this analogy, it lets us know what is the hardest part about doing intercultural work. It isn't the desire or the willingness to see things from other people's lens. In fact, it's not even trying to see it through their lens. It's the inability to take off our own lens. And it's the difficulty in acknowledging the lens that I have right now. And actually, no one else knows I have this lens either. Right? And so that's a real challenge. Now, I've shared that analogy at this dean's conference, and half the group of deans were from sciences, and half the group of deans were from arts. And I could see the science deans all rolling their eyes, going, oh, this is like artsy-fartsy talk again. So we have a science version of this story. This is the Muller-Lyer illusion. This has been studied for decades, and when you look at these lines, we often see them as being two different lengths. I promise you, they're exactly the same length. I cut and paste exactly the lines from each other. Joseph Heinrich, Stephen Hein, and Arne Nornzijn, who are cultural psychologists at UBC, they published a paper a number of years ago, and basically what they found was that respondents from Western-educated industrial, rich, and democratic societies, also known as weird societies, always saw B as longer. And what was interesting about that was he began to prove that culture, in fact, affects your visual perception. One of the most basic human things is visual perception. And up until that point, we thought culture really only affected subjective things. So, my family's from the Philippines. They like certain foods over these certain foods. They're uncomfortable here versus being more comfortable there. And what this is saying is, no, this chair looks different. It actually looks different. And we're like, no, yeah, it looks different to people of different cultures. So that's huge. That's a huge impact for us. And so as a result, math is not just math is math is math. And that's one of the questions I got asked from our mathematics. Isn't math just math? Isn't math just the same all across, it doesn't matter what, no, because you cannot teach math outside of a cultural context. There's always a story involved in your problem solving. And what we've seen is that if you create different scenarios for different students, they have different learning outcomes, depending on the language, the background, the cultural context that they're coming from. And that's been huge for us. As well, we've uncovered one area that we really struggle seeing the same on, and that's academic integrity. Our international students are far overrepresented in issues to do with academic misconduct. And that's a big issue. It's pandemic. In fact, the province of Alberta has recognized this as being such a big issue. The province has declared an initiative around a strategy, a province-wide strategy around academic integrity. And I'm like, wow. So we need to start thinking about this a little bit more. Now, the fourth part of that quadrant around doing this well is this, I want to introduce to you this concept of tulava. Tulava was introduced to me by one of the deans at Thompson Rivers University, TRU. I could only see TRU in my head. I think of what the acronym was. And tulava is a Pacifica term. It's a trying to think of the name of the specific peoples, but the Polynesian term that means to care for the space between us. And the way that Dean described it was anytime two people from different cultures come together, actually two people of any culture come together, they create a space between them. And that space needs to be cared for, because the initial impact of us coming together isn't always a calm and peaceful one. And she described the coming together of two cultures as being like two rivers coming into contact. Because the thing about culture is that it's constantly moving. Cultures aren't static. It's not like I'm a static thing and you're a static thing and we're actually moving. And when we come together, there's a bit of an impact, right? So this is the Yangtze River and the Jialing River coming together as a point of impact. And I thought, what a great analogy. So what happens is that you have these two currents hit. The first thing it creates is turbulence. You're right. And if you're not prepared to get through the turbulence, we don't actually land in a place that's positive for us. This is hard for us to say because we've believed multiculturalism as being like over positive all the time. Like, what? Bringing people together creates turbulence? No, that's not what we've said. We've said peaceful coexistence. Well, the only way peaceful coexistence can take place is if we never talk. We never connect. Hence the bento box multiculturalism we've created, as opposed to a little bit more turbulence between those groups, and learning how to work through that. And so I was so excited to hear that there's actually a body of knowledge, a 1,000-year-old body of knowledge around this idea of managing that turbulence, caring for that turbulence, and referred to as tulava. And so this is the seed for Stephen Toop when he made this a priority for the university. And the quote that I often refer to is this: people who do not know how to recognize, understand, and appreciate cultural difference or know how to communicate across cultural and situational boundaries are people who are unable to function effectively in many circumstances and who do not enable and may impede critical work in our societies. Do you know who he was referring to as people? He didn't say because it would have got him in trouble. But teachers, admin staff, management, right, can actually become I don't want to deal with that turbulence. And they become the barrier. They're the wall, right? Keep them apart. It's easier. So one of the things that we did was very contentious at UBCs. During the Umbrella Revolution, the democracy protests in Hong Kong, I got very concerned. I saw a news story of a group of protesters marching towards the Hong Kong, I think it was the International or the Office of Economic Development in Toronto. And along their march, they came across some international students from China celebrating a national holiday in the park. Right? Something happened. And I thought, we probably have all the ingredients for that exact same, I don't want to call it a conflict, but situation. And I thought to myself, I wonder how international students from China or Macau or Taiwan are thinking about these moments as we're watching them on the news when their classmates are from Hong Kong. They're right beside them. And so what we did was we did something kind of courageous. We actually invited students to come together. And that was really challenging because we had to do it in such a way that students were involved and they knew what it was going to be about, but we couldn't put that in any poster or any communication. We could never say this was going to be a conversation about democracy in Hong Kong because there's real safety risks for their families back home. But we pulled it off. And we created this thing called the Hua Dialogue. So Hua is a word in Chinese that refers to a person, and a Chinese person. And we brought together Mandarin-speaking students from Hong Kong, Taiwan, Macau, and mainland China. And they had this really meaningful conversation about how this was impacting them, what they're reflecting on. And I thought to myself, we could only have this here. We could only do this here because 1/3 of the student population speaks Mandarin or Cantonese. And so rather than it being an issue, How might we actually use this as an opportunity to create new dialogue that doesn't exist anywhere in the world? And what was amazing was one of the sessions, we had a group from Taiwan visit, and I asked them the day before, if your parents knew you're going to be meeting students from mainland China to have a conversation about democracy, how would they feel about that? And they're like, they would absolutely forbid us from going. And what we find is that, in fact, although they all speak the same language, they don't know each other on our campuses. And we actually have to be the ones to initiate that for them and create the safe space for them to come together. And it's not easy. It's a lot of work, and it's very high risk, but the payoff is fantastic. A student group was formed, and this group has now had 5 dialogues on campus, and the group continues to grow bigger and bigger. And I'm very, very excited about that work. So in a nutshell, I put that all on one sheet. What I find is deans and our administrators and our faculty like having one sheet overview, so I've tried to make that happen. I've talked a little bit about the intersection of indigeneity and intercultural and internationalization. They do intersect. We should not treat them as overly separate. I overviewed a little bit about what we mean by internationalization. Our 2 key learnings, which I hope you will take away and inform your work. I've talked through the 4 different areas of how we might do this well and do this better. And like I said, I would encourage you to think that if we're not going to do it well, maybe not do it at all. Like it really does create pain for people. I went through the business case, the pleasure enhancement. I talked a little bit about the time. Give yourself more time to adapt. Give yourself more resources required to adapt. And make sure those resources include the things that you might need to grow the intercultural fluency on your campus, not just for your students, but also your staff. Realize and confront the reality that cultural difference is real, it's concrete, and that it really affects how we see academic integrity. Right now, it's a kind of a fuzzy thing for a lot of students. Are your resources crystal clear? Are your resources in multiple languages? If not, we can't say we've done our due diligence. Take care of that space between us, all of us. Not just our international students, but all of us. We will model the behavior that we want to see our students undertake. And I want to leave you one take-home tactic, and that's rolling seat assignment. So my symbol of that is the USB key. When I met with our academic heads and directors, half of them said, your plan is way too heavy-handed. I want to do what I want to do. And the other half said, I don't even have time to read I can't even read past page 3. I need a plug and play. Right? So this is my plug and play for you. Rolling seat assignment. This was developed by John Burton, who's a professor in management at UBC Okanagan. He started to feel the decrease of joy in teaching. And that came out of the lack of interaction with his students and the lack of reciprocal feedback from his students. He goes, I need that feedback to feel engaged and excited about teaching. So what he did is at the beginning of the term, he randomly assigns everyone in his class a row. Okay? And then he explains to the students that every week, these rows will move closer to the front. The front row will move to the back, and progressively every week, like this. A group this size, he says, I will have face time with the first 2 rows at least 3 times a term. And I sometimes can actually learn their names. So he has little name cards for them. And he goes, I let them know that when you're in the first 2 rows, I will call on you. You are my 2 rows for that class. So you think about the implications of that. And then he surveys them at the end and says, how does that for you as a student? So one of the things is he wants to prove to them that you're not going to pass out if you sit in the front row from fear. This is important because the research shows that people who sit in the front row not only do better in class, so if you have a student that's struggling, first thing they can do is sit closer to the front. If you maintain that practice in your professional life, you actually end up making more money. There's lots of theories as to why that's the case. Okay? It's too late. We're almost done. Don't run that ball now, okay? And so he wanted to give them that opportunity to sit up and at least and if he had a student who had a very serious anxiety disorder, he let them at least stay in the second row. So he accommodated for that. But basically, he wanted that. It was for him. And what he found was, in mixing the students up, they actually met more people in their class. And then naturally, they formed this cohort of randomly formed people. So by the time he did group projects by midway through, they kind of knew each other, but they didn't select each other. right? And they got used to that, and that's more like the real world. Like, we never get to pick our teams. We never get to pick our committees. It's like, it's who's there and who we have to work with, right? Love them or hate them. It's the case. This has proven to be one of the most impactful ways of creating an intercultural classroom environment without any impact on your curriculum, without any impact on the syllabus, without almost no effort at all other than keeping track of who's supposed to be in what roles. And so he surveys the students at the end of term, and the students say these funny things. He said, you know, when it's my turn to sit in the front, I actually come more prepared. No kidding. I actually do the readings that week. No kidding. What are you doing the other weeks? Right? And there's a kind of anticipation that it's my turn to perform. He says, you know what, everyone else, you want to engage? Sure, you can engage. But for my own self-care, I need this front 2 rows to be engaged. And so he's happier, the performance is better, the level of teaching is better, and everyone wins. And it's a much more intercultural experience for the students as well. So a simple takeaway for you. So that's everything. I hope I've covered a lot, and it was meaningful and practical, and you're able to go away and talk more about this with your colleagues and with your institution. And hopefully I'll get to talk to you afterwards. Thanks very much.
I'm sure that we are all very grateful for your presentation today, Alden. I would like to thank you for surfacing and articulating things that we think about and feel, and you did so with poignancy and humor, and it was just delightful. So I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'd also like to express appreciation to the people who contributed to this presentation and to the day, and seeking out Alden and securing his talent and his amazing way of presenting. It was a collaborative effort. It involved the Diversity Advisory Committee, the Camosun College Faculty Association, and the Professional Development Committee, the Camosun College Student Society, Camosun International, and John, our VP Education's office. So we really appreciate the mutual interest and support for this event. Now, one other quick thing, I just want to let you know, for those of you who are attending the next session, it's scheduled to be held at 11:30, and it's over in Young Building, room 216. This session goes to 12:15 for those of you who are participating in that one. So once again, my thanks to you, Alden, and to everybody for your interest in attending today.
Thanks very much. Thank you.